Welcome back, everyone. This is part two of my NFL coaching grades. We're going to be doing the NFC coaches this week. If you didn't see last week's episode, it'll be linked at the end of the video. Thank you guys again for joining me. If you have any comments, please leave them below. I'll be more than happy to answer them at my earliest convenience. So without further ado, let's get right into this with the NFC East and reigning Super Bowl champions, the Philadelphia Eagles. They finished last year at 14-3. They have head coach Nick Sirianni returning for his fifth season. They have a first-time offensive coordinator, Kevin Patullo, taking over for Kellen Moore, who is the head coach of the Saints now, and then second-year defensive coordinator, Vic Fangio. Now, if you did watch the Eagles closely last season, they progressed very well defensively, which would make sense. They had a very young defensive secondary, notably with two rookies starting at cornerback and nickelback, but they still ended up with really, really good defensive stats. If you look, they ranked first against the rush and second in scoring and 10th in passing. They just had a dominant defense throughout the entire season. On offense, they also had a good year. Kellen Moore is a good offensive coordinator, as pointed out by the fact that he is now a head coach. They ranked second in rushing, which makes sense. They had Barkley go for over 2,000 while missing the last game of the season, and seventh in scoring. They did rank a questionable 29th in passing. Part of that is the fact that they did have a lot more sacks than you'd like for a team that doesn't pass as much as the Eagles. And then they did rank towards the bottom as well in pass attempts. So clearly they just rode their running game and just, threw when they had to or off of play action as that goes. They had a really good turnover differential and point differential last season with a plus 160 and a plus 11. So I think this is a pretty easy. I'm going to give this an A minus. The reason for this is they have a first time offensive coordinator, and Nick Sirianni, well, he did keep his job last season. There were a lot of discussions of whether or not he would actually be able to helm the team prior to last season. And I do question whether his success is tied to how good his coordinators are or aren't. So he keeps Fangio, which should allow the defense to be successful, but is Patullo able to have this kind of success that Kellen Moore had, or is it going to be more like the 2023 season? Who knows? But I'm not going to knock them too much for that. They are the reigning Super Bowl champs for a reason, and they will get an A minus. Next up, we have the 12-5 Washington Commanders and their second-year head coach, Dan Quinn. They were able to retain their offensive coordinator, Cliff Kingsbury, for his second season, and their defensive coordinator, Joe Witt Jr., also returns for his second season. Now, this staff last year had a great season as they were able to make it all the way to the NFC Championship game after picking in the top five the previous draft. They did have a very impressive plus 94 point differential, despite a average plus one turnover ratio. A lot of this can be attributed to their success in the running game, as they ranked third in rushing, fifth in scoring, and against the pass, they ranked third as well. Part of that helped out by the fact that they acquired Marcus Lattimore from the Saints at the trade deadline. Now, they did only rank 17th against the pass or as a passing offense, which isn't great, but we've seen worse. The Eagles just had a 29th ranking, and they ranked 30th in rushing, which is not good whatsoever. But the defense did only ranked 18th in scoring, which is just slightly below average. Overall, I think that the big strides that the young players made under this coaching staff is really what they can hang their hats on. I really like that they were able to keep Cliff Kingsbury so that Jaden Daniels can have some consistency. I do probably expect that he will be replaced as he gets a head coaching job offer next season that he can't turn down. But for now, it's a very competent, very successful coaching staff. Dan Quinn has taken a team previously to the Super Bowl, that being the Falcons that lost in the 28-3 fiasco versus the Patriots. And I believe that the defense will continue to grow. Dan Quinn is a defensive-minded coach. He ran some great defenses in Seattle before getting the Atlanta job, and then with the Cowboys before getting this Commanders job. So I think there's a lot to like here with the coaching staff, and for that reason, I'm going to give them a B plus. I want to see more results coming into the second season for this staff before being able to put them in the like top coaching stratosphere. And I also want to see what happens with this defense as they need to be better. They really, unlike the Lions, who we'll get to in a little bit, they didn't really have any injuries to hang their hats on when their defense started to not perform towards the end of the season. So it'll be interesting to see how the defense progresses. But again, with Quinn being a defensive minded guy and running some really successful defenses in the past in his career, I expect him to take a step forward. The 7-10 Cowboys are next up on our list, and they have hired a completely new staff after getting rid of Mike McCarthy this past off season. They hired Brian Schottenheimer to be their head coach, with Clayton Adams taking over as their offensive coordinator and Matt Eberflus taking over as their defensive coordinator. And looking at their stats from last season, they did not rank well in rushing, either offensively or defensively, as they were 27th offensively and 29th defensively. They also ranked 31st defensively, which is not good whatsoever. And they ranked 17th and 11th defensively and offensively, respectively. So overall, they just did not have a top of the line season anywhere. They had some bottom half of the seasons in running, offensively and defensively, and scoring defensively was not good whatsoever. With a -6 turnover ratio and a point differential of -118, they're honestly lucky to have only gone 7-10. Obviously, the Dak Prescott injury looms large here, but I also think the Cowboys made a very Jerry Jones-esque hire with Schottenheimer. I think that they went a little bit of big fish hunting, going after like Deion Sanders and some other college guys. And I actually was expecting Kellen Moore to get this job after he got his start in coaching with the Cowboys. But I think it was a little surprising that either Moore chose the Saints over the Cowboys, or the Cowboys just decided that Moore wasn't the right fit. I think part of that is that Jerry Jones, like I said before, he likes guys that will allow him to have input, or will, I think at the very least, at least feign um, respect for his football knowledge. Now, not to say that he's not knowledgeable in football, but in the X's and O's and the day to days of running a team from a coaching perspective, I don't think that he's very knowledgeable, but I think that he thinks he is. And for that reason, I think Brian Schottenheimer just basically was like, yeah, we can do whatever you want. And he got hired because of that. So I don't love this coaching staff. I don't think Brian Schottenheimer was deserving of this shot. No disrespect to him. I just don't think that he did anything um, worthy of this opportunity other than kind of bend to Jerry Jones' will. That might be harsh, but it's how I feel. And Matt Eberflus, I think, is a good hire for defensive coordinator. I think Clayton Adams is kind of a wild card as an offensive coordinator, as he hasn't done it before. Eberflus is a good defensive hire, and for that reason, I'm going to save them from a complete F and give them just a straight D. I don't think that Schottenheimer lasts more than this one season, unless they have a really, really good season, which I don't expect them to have whatsoever. I don't expect them to get to the playoffs. We can get to that in a separate video. So yeah, Matt Eberflus saves this team's grade from being our first F of the series, and yeah, just not a good outlook from the coaching side of things for the Cowboys going into next season. Last up for the NFC East is my team, the New York Giants. They went 3-14 last season, and they have a returning coaching staff. Brian Daboll enters his fourth season. Offensive coordinator Mike Kafka enters his fourth season as well. And defensive coordinator Shane Bowen enters his second season after replacing Wink Martindale. They did not rank very well in any of the rankings for the most part outside of defensive rushing, where they ranked 8th. Otherwise, they ranked 28th in offensive passing, 23rd in offensive rushing, 31st in offensive scoring, which is really bad, and then 21st in defensive scoring and 27th in offensive passing. With a -8 turnover ratio and a -142 point differential, it is no surprise that they did go 3-14. The coaching staff and the front office, for all intents and purposes, was given a playoff mandate for this upcoming season by the owner of the Giants, and they will be looking to do that while also trying to develop Jackson Dart. Now, one of the things to note about Brian Daboll is he is largely credited as the guy who developed Josh Allen while he was with the Bills. He did a very good job developing Allen, of course, and it looks like he will be tasked with developing Dart, who they took in the first round after trading up in this past draft. And while they were given a playoff mandate, it'll be interesting to see if that actually holds true. If they start losing and then Dart comes in and performs well, will Daboll get another shot? Who knows? I think it's something also to note is that offensive coordinator Mike Kafka was given a few head coaching interviews as well, which just goes to show how respected he is around the league as an offensive mind. Now, the defense should have done better. They had a couple injuries. Their defensive backfield, the secondary, did not do well throughout the season. But their front seven is pretty good. Their pass rush obviously is very talented going into this season. They will need to convert more turnovers and hopefully just score more. I mean, 31st in scoring is not good whatsoever, and you're not going to win like that. So it'll be interesting to see. I think overall, I'm going to give this coaching staff a C minus. I think this is one of the biggest question marks going into next season is what will happen with this coaching staff, because there are more things at play than you would expect for a team that has been as poor as the Giants have been over the last 10 seasons. I think they're either the worst win percentage or the second worst winning percentage since 2015, 2014, something like that. So not a good stretch of time for the Giants, and we're going to see if this coaching staff can get it done this coming season. Leading off the NFC North, we have the 15-2 Detroit Lions with returning head coach Dan Campbell entering his fifth season. He will, for the first time, have two new coordinators as offensive coordinator John Morton enters his first season with the Lions, and defensive coordinator Kelvin Shepard enters his first season as defensive coordinator with the Lions. Last season, they ranked very well in most categories, with the lone exception being defensive rushing, where they ranked 30th. However, on offense, they ranked incredibly well, being second in passing, sixth in rushing, and first in scoring, as they had the most points scored all season. On defense, they were fifth against the pass and seventh in scoring, further highlighting their enormous point differential at plus 222 with a plus 9 turnover ratio as well. It's just a very overall good season. I think that the low ranking in defensive rushing is a twofold thing. One, they suffered a lot of injuries with their front seven, and two, they were blowing teams out, so teams were less reliant on the running games, as Detroit Lions would typically get off to a lead or into a large lead getting into the second half of the game, meaning teams were not running it as much. It'll be interesting to see how these two coordinators do work out, being both of their first turns as a coordinator in the NFL. But I trust Dan Campbell completely. I'm going to give this coaching staff a straight A. I think Dan Campbell has done nothing to show that he would not have picked the right guys for the job. Kelvin Shepard getting promoted from, I believe, their linebackers coach to their defensive coordinator, and John Morton coming over from, I think it was the Broncos last season. But while we won't be seeing the typical Ben Johnson offense in Detroit, I do still think that this will be a very competent, very successful coaching staff led by Dan Campbell once again in the 2025 NFL season. Next up is the Minnesota Vikings. They went 14-3, losing the last game of the season in the regular season to the Lions to wind up with the top wildcard spot instead of the number one seed. They have returning head coach Kevin O'Connell, returning offensive coordinator Wes Phillips, and returning defensive coordinator Brian Flores. Now, one of the big things to note from last season was the steps the defense took towards improving, as they did finish 28th in passing, but second in rushing and fifth in scoring is a huge improvement over the previous year. And part of the reason for their success was the fact that they had a plus 12 turnover ratio. The Vikings were one of the best teams in the league at forcing turnovers. They also had a plus 100 point differential, which, when we're looking at the other teams that ended up with a win record in the realm of the Vikings, that is a little low. So they did do really well in very close games, which is evident by their turnover ratio, which will help you when it's a close game. But also finishing ninth in scoring, sixth in passing, and 19th in rushing on offense is not bad stats either. I think one of the biggest things to note is the development of Sam Darnold as a quarterback that Kevin O'Connell and Wes Phillips were able to foster, and how they're going to be trying to do that with last year's first round pick, J.J. McCarthy, going into this season. A lot of their success will hinder on McCarthy's development and his ability to be a pro level quarterback. But by no means should they be taking a meaningful step backwards. I think if they were to have a similar type season with these rankings and the point differential they ended up with, they probably don't get to 14-3. But going 10-7, not out of the realm of possibility. I think this is a very, very good coaching staff. Especially with Brian Flores returning as defensive coordinator, which he might not be back after this season, as he might get some head coaching offers that he likes. But we will see what happens. For now, I think I'm going to give the Minnesota Vikings a B plus. Like I said, I really like their coaching staff. I do question how they fell apart towards the end of the season and some of the issues that they've had in close games. And like I said, I think that they kind of outplayed their statistics win loss wise, and the point differential points to that. So hopefully they can develop JJ McCarthy, which is the biggest question mark going into this season. And that defense continue if that defense continues to improve, then they will continue to rack up wins. The 11-6 Green Bay Packers are up next, with their head coach Matt LaFleur returning for his 7th season at the helm. They also return both coordinators, as Adam Stevanich comes back for his 4th season and Jeff Hafley comes back for his 2nd season. They did grade out very well in all the categories, finishing 12th in offensive passing, 5th in offensive rushing, thanks to the addition of Josh Jacobs, and 8th in scoring. On defense, they finished 13th against the pass, 7th against the rush, and 6th in scoring. Now, this was all helped by the fact they had a plus 12 turnover ratio, which is really good, and a plus 122 point differential, which would put them about probably where most teams with this type of record ends up, if even a little bit lower. Now, they did have some issues with Jordan Love getting injured at the beginning of the season and his development kind of stalemating compared to the previous season. It'll be interesting to see how Love progresses through this next season. But everything around him looks very good. I mean, the Packers are not a team that typically goes into free agency and makes a lot of high money signings. So this is a team that develops their own players they draft, they trade for, or whatever happens there. And they're very good at it. I mean, they were a playoff team. They had 11 wins. They ranked in the top half of the league in every single category. They're just a successful team. They're a good franchise. The coaching staff, I'm not LaFleur's biggest fan. I think he can be a little rough around the edges, but as a coach and as an offensive mind, I think that he is very good. I think I'm going to give this coaching staff a B plus. Put them in the same range as the Vikings. I don't like that Jordan Love's development didn't continue and it kind of stalemated, his injury notwithstanding. So I do want to dock them a little bit for that. But still, Packers fans should be very confident in their coaching staff going into the next season. Last up in the NFC North is the Chicago Bears, who went 5-12 last season. They did fire their entire staff during the season. So they have first-time head coach Ben Johnson coming over from the in-division Lions. They have Declan Doyle coming over for his first season as offensive coordinator, and Dennis Allen coming over for his first season as defensive coordinator. Now, I do think the hiring of Dennis Allen does really help Ben Johnson to acclimate to being a head coach. It'll be interesting to see if he goes the Dan Campbell route and establishes a culture himself and lets Declan Doyle do the offense and just be the general, which is something that Dan Campbell does very well, or if he is more of like a Matt LaFleur, where the whole staff establishes the culture while Ben Johnson takes control of the offense and then does that whole thing. But we can't infer anything off of nothing. So moving past that. Their rankings last season were not very good except for defensive scoring. They were really good at keeping the other team out of the end zone for the most part, despite some really porous offensive plays and numbers. They were 31st passing, 25th rushing, and 28th scoring. So bottom part of the league in all of those categories on offense, despite a very talented skill position group and the former top pick in Caleb Williams. On defense, they did do pretty well against the pass, finishing average at 16th. Like I said, scoring was 13th, and 28th against the rush was not good. Their defensive line, their front seven, were not the best last season. They did have a +6 turnover ratio, which makes their record even more confounding. However, they with a minus 60 point differential, that's not the most, like, to have 12 losses and 5 wins with a negative 60 point differential means that they were a little bit better than that last season. And +6 turnover ratio means that at the very least, what the offense did do well was protect the ball. And then the Bears defense took away the ball, which is, that'll help your scoring defense. I think at the end of the day, I am going to just give this coaching staff a C+. I do really like the head coaching hire of Ben Johnson. I think that he will be successful, and I think that he will be able to develop Caleb Williams in the way that he needs, and according to all reports, hasn't gotten since going back to his USC days. So I think the Bears fans have a lot of hope going into this season with Ben Johnson at the helm. And like I said before, I think Dennis Allen, being an experienced defensive coordinator, will be able to help Ben Johnson to settle in and hopefully produce some good results for his first season at the helm. First up for the NFC South is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, finishing at 10-7 to win their division last season. They return head coach Todd Boyles for his 4th season, and they have a new offensive coordinator in Josh Grizzard entering his first season after Liam Cohen left for the Jaguars job. And they made the curious decision to not hire an official defensive coordinator, as Todd Bowles will hold both titles. Now, before I get into where they rank and how they looked last year and how they'll look going to this season, I do want to address the fact they don't have a defensive coordinator. Personally, I do see offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator, and head coach as 3 different jobs. There are some teams and some head coaches that prefer to be in control of one side of the ball or the other. But I do think there is an inherent advantage to having an offensive and a defensive coordinator, because as the head coach, you have to handle more. Even if Todd Bowles is like, oh, I'm the defensive coordinator, so I have to be in these different meetings. Well, when will he get to handle the head coach duties then? When will he get to, oversee some offensive meetings or some special teams meetings, or, do media and stuff like that? Like, there's extra things that head coaches need to do to be successful, and I just don't know. Even though Todd Bowles is a great defensive mind, I don't know if it's in his best interest to do both jobs. Now, I'm sure his defensive staff, he believes, is more than capable of covering for him if he's not able to do things because he has head coaching duties. But it seems like an unnecessary added risk for him to do that. But with that being said, let's move on to how they looked last season. Their offense was fantastic, 3rd in passing, 4th in rushing, and 4th in scoring. Now, the thing to note about this is they were like a bottom 3 rushing team last season, or 2 years ago, and they went up to 4th this past year. Part of that is the improved offensive line. Part of that is the drafting of Bucky Irving, who was a fantastic rookie rusher last season for the Tampa Bay Bucks. 4th in scoring is also really good, and obviously Baker Mayfield's continued progression into a top 10 quarterback is noted here, as they also finished 3rd in passing. On defense, they were really bad against the pass, as they were 29th ranked there. They were 4th against the run, which is really good. They did have some issues in the secondary that were not present in their front 7, which accounts for the difference. But at the end of the day, they finished middle of the pack in scoring at 16th. So that's not horrible. The -5 turnover ratio does kind of help to illuminate why, with a +117 point differential, they only ended up at 10-7. As great as Baker Mayfield is as a quarterback, he does have a tendency to be a little careless with the ball, and that does lead to some turnovers. And then their defense did not do the greatest job at creating turnovers. They need to do a little bit better there to see some improvement. Overall, I think because they don't have a defensive coordinator and because they have a first-time offensive coordinator, I'm only going to give them a C plus. I have a lot of confidence the Buccaneers will be able to win their division again this season, but I do not like that Bowles decided to do the defensive coordinator job himself, and there's still a question mark whether Josh Grizzard is able to take the reins from Liam Cohen and continue the success that Cohen had last season. Up is the 8-9 Atlanta Falcons with returning head coach Raheem Morris for his second season. He also returned his offensive coordinator from last season, Zach Robinson, and a new defensive coordinator in Jeff Ulbrich coming over from the Jets. Now, their offensive numbers were very good, despite the fact that Kirk Cousins didn't play the best and was replaced by Michael Penix at the end of the season. They ranked 5th in passing, 10th in rushing, and 14th in scoring. I do think that this means that they didn't score as many touchdowns as they probably should have, because if you're 5th in passing and 10th in rushing, to fall 14th in scoring is a little bit of a question mark. The turnover ratio does help to ease this question a little bit, as they were -6, which means they were turning the ball over more than they should have. But still, I think that they have some pretty easy growth offensively in scoring, even if their passing rushing numbers don't improve necessarily. On defense, that is where they had a little bit more problems, as pass rush was one of the big things they had an issue with. They finished 22nd against the pass, 15th against the rush, and 23rd in scoring. A -34 point differential is not terrible. He does probably put them about where they ended up at 8-9. I would even probably have said, if you told me they had a -34 point differential, I'd probably put them at like 7-10. So I think they ended up about where they were supposed to. I think if they fix the turnover ratio and can cash in more on their offensive yardage and turn that 14th point scoring into even like 8, I think they would have ended up possibly winning the division last season. So it'll be interesting to see. But I think the next season is really more about Michael Penix and his development as a quarterback. If they aren't able to make the playoffs, I don't think the staff will get fired. I think they should exercise some caution. I do question Jeff Ulbrich as their defensive coordinator, as when the Jets fired Robert Saleh last year, their defense did take a step backward. So I question if that's on Ulbrich, if how much like Saleh not being there affected the defense with the Jets last season. But either way, I think it'll still be better than last season. So I'm going to give this coaching staff a B. I liked they were still able to do some things on offense despite Kirk Cousins not playing to his normal standard. And Penix Jr. looked ready to play when he came out, and that's always a good sign. So fix the turnover ratio and score more touchdowns, less field goals, and I think the Falcons will be in a good place next season. The 5-12 Carolina Panthers are next up on our list. They have returning head coach Dave Canales for his second season. Offensive coordinator Brad Idzkick returns for his second season, and defensive coordinator Ejiro Evero returns for his third season. Now, this team did not have a good year with a -193 point differential and a -5 turnover ratio. Very clearly, they didn't score enough points and they gave up too many points. At the end of the day, you're not going to win games that way. Looking into the actual numbers, their defense was just downright terrible, finishing 32nd in scoring, meaning they gave up the most points last season, 32nd in rushing, meaning they gave up the most rushing yards last season, and 23rd in passing, meaning if you ran the ball, if you passed the ball, you were going to score against the Panthers defense. It's not a good place to be. Now, offensively, they were decent, probably about average, rushing the ball, finishing 18th. They were 30th in passing, which is not good, and a little bit signifying of how bad Bryce Young was to begin the season. He looked better towards the end of the season. And 23rd in scoring. So, they just didn't score a lot of points. I do think what they did with Bryce Young last season was risky but beneficial, clearly. Bryce Young looked better after he was benched or sat out a few games, whatever they want to call it. And that was a good decision by Dave Canales. I wonder if Canales was told to try to make Bryce Young work, and if it didn't work, they could replace him. That's kind of what it looked like when Bryce Young did get benched, but he did kind of turn it around a little bit. But his development is Canales and Idzik's most important job. I do find it interesting with how bad the defense was that Evero was kept around. I don't necessarily understand that. Canales didn't hire him. He kept him on from the previous head coach. And with the defense performing as poorly as it did, kept him on still. So that's just an interesting little tidbit there. But I think I'm going to give the Panthers just a C, solid average grade. I do like what Dave Canales is doing and what Brad Idzik is doing as well with the offense and Bryce Young himself. But it's all about Young. It's all about developing their young players as they don't really go out into free agency and sign anyone. They typically just re-sign their own guys and then draft their own guys. And that's how they make their team. So it's all about development for this team, and hopefully they're able to improve off of some really bad numbers last season. Last team up is the New Orleans Saints for the NFC South. They have a new head coach in Kellen Moore, a new offensive coordinator in Doug Nussmeier, and a new defensive coordinator in Brandon Staley. Similar to the situation with Ben Johnson and the Bears, I appreciate Kellen Moore, an offensive mind, bringing in a defensive coordinator with experience, both as a head coach and defensive coordinator in Brandon Staley, so that he has less to worry about on the defensive side of things. I do find it very interesting the routes that they've gone to improve this team. They are a very cap-strapped team, similar to the Browns. So they didn't have many avenues to improvement. And I don't know if Tyler Shuck is the answer there, but they certainly seem like they're going to try it out. Now, they rank 23rd with the pass on offense, 14th rushing the ball, and 25th scoring. The 25th scoring just probably means similar to the Panthers. They weren't converting field goals into touchdowns, or they weren't converting drives that ended up in field goals into touchdowns instead. Part of that is that they with Chris Olave missing a lot of the season due to, I believe it was a couple of concussions. They were missing the big playmaker that was able to stretch the field offensively, especially with Kamara getting a little older and slowing down just a little bit. But they still were 14th rushing the ball, so the running game did do pretty well. I would expect those numbers to improve with Kellen Moore at the helm. So the bigger question now becomes the defense, which was 27th against the pass, 31st against the run, but 19th scoring. So at least despite all the yardage that they were giving up, they were very stout when it came to the red zone and to keeping the opponents from scoring touchdowns as opposed to their offense. Now, the -2 turnover ratio is pretty good for a team that ended up with only 5 wins. So is the -60 point differential. I mean, it's if you look at the Falcons, who were 8-9 at -34, I believe it was, the -60 doesn't look bad. I mean, there were teams that were like -150 and they won 5 games. So the -60 does say that they weren't, as bad necessarily in the box score and on the scoreboard as you would have expected, especially from a team giving up this much yardage. So hopefully they're able to carry that over at the very least. Now, with this being a new coaching staff, I am just going to, I think, give them a C+. I do like Ben Johnson better than Kellen Moore, but I think I like the coordinators down in New Orleans better. So I'll just call that even and give them a C+, similar to what the Bears received. Our last division here is the NFC West, and leading off the NFC West is the reigning champions, Los Angeles Rams, finishing at 10-7. They return head coach Sean McVay for his 9th season, offensive coordinator Mike LaFleur for his 3rd season, and defensive coordinator Chris Shula for his 2nd season. Now, their offense ranked very well passing the ball, finishing 10th. They finished below average at 24th rushing the ball and 20th scoring, which is kind of uncommon for McVay-led teams. Passing on defense, they were 20th. Rushing on defense, they were 22nd. And scoring, they were 17th. Now, their defense did something similar to what the Eagles did, whereas it was very young and it developed as the season went on. A credit to Shula and his defensive staff. They were +6 in the turnover ratio, which kind of does help cover their -19 point differential, which is not typical for a team with 10 wins. It was really interesting to see how the Rams season progressed and how they almost beat the eventual Super Bowl champion Eagles in the playoffs. And I do think that they're in a very good spot going into next season. These numbers might not look great on paper, but they don't paint the whole picture. If you take a first half or second half look at this team, they look much better. I do think it'll be interesting to see how the offense works without Cup. I know Cup's been injured in the past, but Devontae Adams for Cooper Cup isn't exactly a plug and play fix. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there and how the young defense for the Rams continues to progress. I am going to give this coaching staff an A. I think there's nothing wrong with what's happening. They're all returning coordinators. Sean McVay is a fantastic head coach with a Super Bowl win on his resume, and there's no reason to doubt what they're doing whatsoever. Our next team to look at is the Seattle Seahawks at 10-7 last season. They just missed the playoffs and the division, losing the tiebreaker to the Rams. They have returning head coach Mike Macdonald for his second season, first time offensive coordinator Clint Kubiak leading the helm there, and Aiden Durd at his second season as defensive coordinator. Now, this offense is going through a little bit of an overhaul with Sam Darnold taking over at quarterback for Geno Smith. They were 8th in passing last season, but they were 28th in rushing, which was not helped by their injuries in the backfield last season. They also had some offensive line issues, as they have had for a number of years now. But they were 18th in scoring, so the low rushing numbers didn't as much affect their scoring as some other teams have. On defense, they were 11th versus the pass, 16th against the rush, and 11th scoring, which is really good. They ended up with a plus 7 point differential, which is like a tiny bit low for a team with 10 wins, but part of that is because of their -6 turnover ratio. Hopefully, the switching quarterback from a player like Geno Smith, who is a little bit less careful with the ball, to Sam Darnold, who is a little bit more careful with the ball, especially after his 1 year with Kevin O'Connell's offense, will help them to fix that turnover ratio, which might get them to up that point differential and hopefully even score a little bit more, as 8th passing and 18th scoring isn't the best um, gap that you want to have there. But they still turned out a good season in Mike Macdonald's first year, and they should hopefully get a good second season. I would expect this defense especially to improve, as it is a young defense, and Mike Macdonald is just kind of starting to get his hands on the defense and getting it the way that he wants. I am going to give this coaching staff a B. I think there's a lot of potential here, but a lot of it will revolve around how Sam Darnold performs and the development of third-round pick Jalen Milroe. Now, if they can have Darnold play a good 2 years and then Milroe step in and take over and be very successful, this team and this coaching staff will be together for a long time and be good for a long time. But that is still to be seen, and hopefully Mike Macdonald and his staff can have a good second season in Seattle. Next up is the 8-9 Arizona Cardinals. They return head coach Jonathan Gannon for his third season, with his coordinators also returning for his third season, OC Drew Petzig and DC Nick Raylis. Now, they did show some improvement across the board last season, finishing 18th in passing, 7th in rushing, and 12th in offensive scoring. They also then finished 14th in defensive passing, 20th against the run defensively, and 15th in scoring. It's interesting to note that they did have a -3 point differential and a plus 21 um, point differential. Yeah. And part of the things that befell this team was that they weren't great at the end of the game and in close game situations. It almost was a young team trying to decide, or not like trying to decide, but trying to develop the ability to win when it mattered, and they just weren't able to get it done as much as they would have liked. I mean, a plus 21 point differential, that's better than the Rams, who won the division. So, -3 in turnover ratio, not great, but the plus 21 point differential plus where they ranked everywhere else does show that there's more to this team than what they performed with last year. I do think I'm going to give this coaching staff a B, just like the Seahawks. I like what's happening here. I like what they have established. Now it's time to continue to make that next step for the Cardinals and prove that this coaching staff and this team is ready to be a difference maker in the NFC. Our last team of the day is the 6-11 San Francisco 49ers, with Kyle Shanahan returning for his ninth season as head coach. He has first season offensive coordinators in Clay Kubiak and Robert Saleh returning from his stint with the Jets. Now, this team did rank very well offensively. with 4th in passing, 12th in rushing, and 13th in scoring. They were also 5th against the pass, which was surprising for me to learn, but being 18th against the rush and 29th against the defensive scoring, just that does help to illustrate that they were just giving up too many points. They also were not causing enough turnovers and turning the ball over too much, as they had a negative 10 turnover ratio, which is just crazy for a team that was just in the Super Bowl the previous season. A minus 47 point differential does show that they probably should have had a win or two more than the 6 wins that they did end up with. However, a minus 10 turnover ratio definitely helps to illustrate why that was the case. I do think a healthier season from the team as a whole will lead to wins on their own. And I do think that Kubiak and Salah are improvements on their previous coordinators. But on the offensive side, at least, it all runs through Shanahan, hence the good numbers. And I wonder if actually getting rid of Debo Samuel will open up the offense a little bit, because they don't have to manufacture touches for him. But that remains to be seen. I think the bigger addition will just be Brandon Ayuk being healthy, if he's able to remain healthy this season. The big thing to note here is Salah's return to the defense. If he's able to bring them back to the defense that it was when the Niners were going to the Super Bowl, I do believe that he will be able to do so. How quickly that happens will largely depend on health and how the young players that they have develop. Having to pay Purdy and a bunch of their offensive players does leave them a little thin on defense, and we'll see how Salah is able to get through that. Overall, I am going to give this coaching staff an A minus. I'm just going to give them the minus because they did have a bad season last year, and the new coordinators. I've been docking a lot of teams for that, especially first-time head coaches and stuff like that. So I do think, out of respect to everyone else, just give them an A minus, not an A. And, I'm comfortable with that. And I think the Niners are going to have a good season because they do have a good coaching staff. And that is a large part of the battle. That has been my NFC coaching grades leading into spring training in the 2025 season. Thank you guys so much if you made it this far. I appreciate it. Like I said in the beginning, leave me any comments. I'll be more happy to have conversations there. And if you want to see any other of my videos, they're going to be right here. And subscribe for more sports content.